For 400 years, an entire nation disappeared beneath chains. Children opened their eyes to slavery as their first reality. Mothers wept over sons condemned by a fearful king. Fathers cried out to heaven while silence echoed back. Generation after generation suffered beneath the shadow of Egypt. No rescue came. No prophet appeared. No miracle broke the darkness. And somewhere in that silence, people began to wonder if God had forgotten them. But while Israel suffered beneath whips and oppression, behind prison walls, inside royal palaces, through betrayal, famine, heartbreak, and loss, God was quietly preparing the fall of an empire. Because when heaven seems silent, God is often building something history has never seen before. This is the journey of the children of Israel. The rise of Joseph and the birth of Israel's suffering. Egypt, the greatest empire of the ancient world. A kingdom rising beside the Nile River, like a monument to human power itself. Massive pyramids pierced the horizon, golden temples shimmered beneath the desert sun, pharaohs ruled with absolute authority, worshipped as gods. To the nations surrounding it, Egypt looked eternal, untouchable. But behind the polished walls of the royal palace, fear was entering the heart of a king. And far beneath that palace, inside a forgotten prison cell, sat a Hebrew slave named Joseph. Joseph's story was already marked by pain long before Egypt ever heard his name. He had once been the beloved son of Jacob, a dreamer. A young man who believed God had destined him for greatness, but dreams can provoke jealousy. Joseph's brothers hated him, so one day, consumed by envy, they betrayed him. They threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and lied to their father. Imagine Joseph's heartbreak, dragged across the desert in chains, torn away from family, sold like property into a foreign land. Even when Joseph remained faithful, suffering still followed. He served in the house of Potiphar, but after a false accusation, he was thrown into prison. Years passed in darkness. No justice came. No miracle arrived. Did he wonder if God had abandoned him? Some of the deepest spiritual battles happen in silence, when heaven appears quiet. Maybe some people watching understand that feeling. But what looked like abandonment was actually preparation. Because prisons are sometimes classrooms for destiny. At the appointed moment, everything changed. One night, Pharaoh awoke in terror. The ruler of Egypt had seen dreams so disturbing that sleep abandoned him completely. 7 healthy cows emerged from the Nile. Then suddenly, 7 thin and diseased cows rose behind them and devoured the healthy ones whole. By morning, Pharaoh's spirit was deeply troubled. Immediately, he summoned Egypt's wisest men. But no one could explain the dreams. Then, a servant remembered Joseph. Within hours, Pharaoh ordered the prisoner brought before him. 1 minute, Joseph sat in a dungeon. The next, he stood before the throne. A season of waiting can feel endless, until suddenly everything changes. Pharaoh said, "I have heard you can interpret dreams." Joseph answered, "I cannot do it." But God will give Pharaoh the answer. Joseph revealed their meaning. 7 years of abundance were coming. The Nile would flood perfectly. Harvests would overflow. The land would prosper. But then 7 years of catastrophic famine would strike. The famine would be so severe that people would forget the abundance entirely. Joseph offered wisdom. Store grain during the years of abundance. Prepare while there is still time. Pharaoh stared at him in amazement. In one stunning moment, Joseph's life changed forever. Pharaoh removed his royal signet ring and placed it upon Joseph's hand. The prisoner became ruler. The slave became governor over Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. The same man forgotten in prison now rode through Egypt in royal chariots. Crowds bowed before him. What human beings meant for evil, God transformed. Just as Joseph warned, 7 years of abundance arrived. Egypt flourished, storehouses filled beyond measure. Joseph prepared relentlessly, then the skies changed, the winds became dry, the earth stopped producing. Famine swept across the world, crops failed, families starved. But Egypt had food, because God had prepared one man in advance. Far away in Canaan, an aging Jacob watched famine consume the land. He told his sons, "Go down to Egypt so that we may live." They had no idea they were walking into the fulfillment of God's plan. Jacob's sons traveled through brutal desert terrain toward Egypt. When they finally stood before Egypt's governor, they bowed low before Joseph. The brother they betrayed, the brother they believed was gone forever. Imagine the memories flooding his mind, the pit, the chains. He had every reason to seek revenge. But suffering had transformed him. Eventually, Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. He revealed himself. "I am Joseph." Terror seized his brothers immediately, but Joseph wept. Not tears of hatred, but tears of redemption. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Joseph invited Jacob and the entire family to settle in Egypt, and so Israel entered Egypt, not as slaves, but as honored guests. 70 people journeyed into the empire, a small family. But hidden inside that family was a future nation. The Israelites settled in the land of Goshen. It was fertile land near the Nile, rich for livestock, farming, and growth. For a time there was peace. Children were born, families multiplied, generations expanded, years passed, then decades, then centuries, and the descendants of Jacob increased dramatically throughout Egypt. What began as a small family became a massive people group. The Israelites grew strong, numerous, prosperous. But history often changes when leadership changes. Joseph died. Then the generation that remembered him disappeared. And eventually, a new Pharaoh rose to power. A Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. A Pharaoh who looked at Israel not with gratitude, but with fear. The new Pharaoh watched the Hebrews multiplying throughout the land and became deeply threatened. What if they become stronger than us? What if they join our enemies? Fear began poisoning his judgment, and fear, when mixed with power, often becomes cruelty. So Pharaoh enslaved the Israelites. Hebrew men were forced into brutal labor projects across Egypt. They built storage cities, carried heavy stone beneath scorching heat, molded bricks from mud and straw while Egyptian overseers drove them mercilessly. Whips cracked through the air, bodies collapsed from exhaustion. Every sunrise brought another day of suffering. Imagine the emotional atmosphere among the Israelites. Mothers watching husbands dragged into labor fields before dawn. Children growing up surrounded by fear and oppression. Old men dying beneath the weight of slavery. And still, the Israelites continued multiplying. The more Pharaoh oppressed them, the more they increased. This terrified him even further, and darkness entered his heart completely. Then Pharaoh gave one of the most horrifying commands in biblical history. Every Hebrew baby boy was to be killed. Thrown into the Nile River. Imagine the terror spreading through Hebrew homes. Pregnant mothers living in constant fear. Fathers helpless to protect their families. Parents hiding crying infants, praying soldiers would not hear them. The Nile, once the source of life for Egypt, became a river of death for Israel. The emotional suffering became unbearable. Generation after generation lived beneath oppression. Some were born slaves and died slaves, never seeing freedom even once, and through all of it, heaven still seemed silent. No miracles yet, no deliverer yet, no rescue yet, only chains, only grief, only waiting. But this is where many people misunderstand God's timing. Silence does not mean absence. Delay does not mean abandonment. While Israel cried beneath slavery, God was already preparing the answer. A child would soon be born under Pharaoh's death sentence. A child hidden among the reeds of the Nile. A child raised inside Pharaoh's own palace, and through that child, God would confront the greatest empire on earth. But before deliverance comes, darkness often reaches its deepest point first. The children of Israel had entered Egypt through favor. Now they suffered beneath chains. What began as refuge had become oppression. And yet, hidden beneath centuries of pain, God's promise was still alive. Because the story was never merely about slavery, it was about redemption. And soon, Egypt would witness the terrifying power of the God it refused to acknowledge. The night Egypt collapsed. For centuries, Israel suffered in silence. The cries of slaves rose into the night skies of Egypt. Mothers buried children. Fathers collapsed beneath impossible labor. Entire generations lived and died beneath chains. And still, God seemed silent, No prophet came, no army arrived, no miracle shattered the oppression. 400 years passed. Think about that. Empires changed, kings died, civilizations evolved, but Israel remained trapped beneath slavery. And somewhere in the darkness of Egypt, a child was about to be born, a child Pharaoh tried to destroy, a child heaven had chosen. Because when evil believes it has finally won, God often begins his greatest work in secret. Pharaoh's decree spread terror through every Hebrew household. Every Hebrew baby boy must die. Soldiers searched homes. Families whispered in fear. Pregnant mothers lived beneath constant dread. And during this terrifying time, a Hebrew woman gave birth to a son. The Bible says she saw that he was beautiful, but this was more than a mother's love. Something about the child felt marked by destiny. For 3 months, she hid him. Imagine the tension inside that small home. Every cry could mean death. Every knock at the door could bring soldiers. But eventually, hiding him became impossible. And so his mother made one of the most heartbreaking decisions imaginable. She placed the baby into a small basket coated with pitch and set him among the reeds of the Nile River. Can you imagine her tears, releasing her son into uncertainty, trusting God when she had no control left? And strangely, the same river Pharaoh used to destroy Hebrew sons became the river God used to preserve one. Because God has a pattern throughout history. The enemy often creates the very circumstances that lead to his own defeat. Not long after, Pharaoh's daughter came to the Nile to bathe. Then she saw it, a basket among the reeds. Inside, a crying Hebrew child, and in one of the greatest ironies in Scripture, compassion entered the heart of Egypt's royal household. Pharaoh's daughter chose to spare the child. She named him Moses, drawn out of the water. The deliverer of Israel was raised inside the palace of the very king who sought his destruction. Only God could write a story like this. Moses grew up surrounded by the glory of Egypt. Servants moved constantly through rooms filled with wealth, politics, and power. He received the education of royalty, military training, Egyptian wisdom, royal privilege. Moses lived as a prince, but despite the luxury around him, he never fully escaped the truth of who he was. Hebrew blood still flowed through his veins, and one day, that hidden identity collided violently with reality. As Moses walked among the labor fields, he witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave mercilessly. Perhaps for the first time, Moses truly saw the suffering of his people, the blood, the exhaustion, the cruelty. Something erupted inside him. Anger, justice, rage. Moses looked around carefully. No one appeared to be watching, and in one impulsive moment, he killed the Egyptian, then buried the body in the sand. But buried sin has a way of rising again. The next day, Moses realized people already knew what he had done. Fear seized him immediately, and when Pharaoh heard the news, he ordered Moses to be executed. In a single moment, Moses lost everything: his position, his identity, his future. The prince became a fugitive, and so Moses fled into the wilderness. Moses escaped to Midian, far from Egypt, far from Pharaoh. The wilderness was harsh and silent. No palace, no servants, no glory. Only desert winds and endless open land. Years passed, then decades. Moses married, built a family, and became a shepherd. Can you imagine the emotional conflict inside him during those years? At 40 years old, he believed he could save Israel through his own strength. Now at 80, he was guiding sheep through empty wilderness, forgotten by history. Or so it seemed. But God often prepares leaders in hidden places before revealing them publicly. The wilderness strips away pride. It exposes weakness. It teaches dependence. And one ordinary day, everything changed forever. Moses led his flock near Mount Horeb when suddenly he saw something impossible. A bush engulfed in flames, yet the fire did not consume it. The bush burned continuously, but remained alive. Moses stepped closer in awe, and then a voice shattered the silence of the desert. Moses, Moses, imagine the terror of that moment. The creator of heaven and earth speaking from fire. Moses trembled. Remove your sandals, the voice declared, "for the place where you stand is holy ground." Then God spoke words Israel had waited centuries to hear. "I have seen the suffering of my people." What a powerful moment. For generations, Israel believed heaven was silent, but God had seen every whip, every tear, every grave, every cry whispered in the night. Nothing had escaped his sight. And then came the calling that changed history forever. "I am sending you to Pharaoh." Moses was overwhelmed. Who am I to do this? Fear flooded him instantly. He remembered his failure, his weakness, his shame. How many people today feel exactly like that, unqualified, broken, afraid? But God repeatedly chooses imperfect people to accomplish impossible things. Moses continued resisting. "What if they do not believe me? What if I cannot speak properly?" Finally, God answered, "I will be with you." That was enough. Not confidence in self, confidence in God. God appointed Moses' brother Aaron to stand beside him and speak on his behalf. Together, the two brothers journeyed back toward Egypt, back toward danger, back toward Pharaoh, back toward the empire that once hunted Moses. Imagine Moses crossing back into Egypt after 40 years away. The memories, the fear, the uncertainty. But he returned as a messenger of God. Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh with a command from heaven itself. "Let my people go." But Pharaoh's heart hardened immediately. Who was this God of Hebrew slaves to challenge the ruler of Egypt? Pharaoh responded with arrogance and contempt. Instead of releasing Israel, he increased their suffering. The Hebrew slaves were forced to gather straw for bricks while maintaining impossible workloads. Whips cracked harder. Labor intensified. Exhaustion deepened. And the Israelites became angry with Moses. "Why have you made our suffering worse? This is one of the most difficult spiritual realities. Sometimes obedience to God initially makes the battle harder. Deliverance often begins with confrontation. And Pharaoh's pride was about to unleash devastation upon Egypt. The 10 plagues. This was divine judgment against Egypt's gods and pride. The Nile turns to blood. Moses stretched out his staff over the Nile River, and suddenly the water turned to blood. Fish floated lifeless to the surface. The river reeked with death. Egypt's source of life became corrupted overnight. Panic spread across the nation. The Nile was sacred to Egypt. Now it had become a symbol of judgment. Still, Pharaoh refused to surrender. Then frogs came. Not hundreds, millions. They invaded homes, ovens, bedrooms, temples, and palaces. Everywhere Egyptians stepped, frogs covered the land. The nation descended into chaos, but Pharaoh hardened his heart again. Gnats and flies. Dust itself became gnats. Then swarms of flies darkened the skies. Food became contaminated. Homes filled with insects. The air itself became unbearable. Each plague exposed the weakness of Egypt's gods. Disease and boils. Then disease swept through Egypt's livestock. Economic devastation spread rapidly. Soon, painful boils erupted across human skin. Fire from the sky. Then heaven itself appeared to turn against Egypt. Thunder exploded. Massive hailstones crashed upon the land. Fire flashed through the storm. Crops shattered. Imagine the terror. The mighty empire of Egypt, suddenly powerless against the god it mocked, the locusts. Then came locusts, a living cloud of destruction. They devoured every remaining crop until Egypt looked stripped bare. Even Pharaoh's own officials begged him. "Do you not yet realize Egypt is ruined? But pride can make people destroy everything." The darkness. Then darkness fell over Egypt, a heavy darkness, a suffocating darkness that covered the land for 3 days. Imagine the psychological terror. The empire sat trapped in fear, and still Pharaoh would not fully surrender. Passover night. God gave Israel instructions. Each household was to sacrifice a lamb. Its blood would be placed upon the doorposts. That night, judgment would move through Egypt, and wherever the blood was present, death would pass over. Inside Hebrew homes, families gathered silently. Children whispered nervously. Fear hung in the air. Outside, Egypt slept beneath dreadful silence. Then midnight came, and suddenly screams shattered the darkness. From palace to prison, death swept across the land. The firstborn sons of Egypt died, homes filled with grief. Even Pharaoh's own household was struck, and finally the proud king broke. "Go," Pharaoh commanded, "leave Egypt." After 400 years of slavery, Israel walked free. The Exodus. Hundreds of thousands departed Egypt that night. Can you imagine their emotions, fear, relief, disbelief? The God who once seemed silent had revealed his power before the world. But the story was not over. The Red Sea. As Israel camped beside the Red Sea, terror suddenly spread. Pharaoh had changed his mind. Egypt's army was approaching fast. Chariots thundered across the desert. Dust filled the horizon. Behind them stood Pharaoh's army. Before them stood the sea. No escape. And then Moses declared, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." Then God moved. A mighty wind tore across the waters, and before the eyes of Israel, the Red Sea split apart. Imagine the scene. Families trembling as they walked between towering walls of water. Step by step, Israel crossed toward freedom, but Pharaoh's army pursued recklessly behind them. Then suddenly the waters crashed back together. For the first time in centuries, they were free. No chains, no masters. Only the realization that God had been working all along. What part of Israel's story impacts you the most? Comment below, and if you're enjoying this documentary, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you don't miss the final part of this incredible journey. Because what happens next in the wilderness will test Israel in ways Egypt never could. Hunger arrived, and with it, fear. We have no food. We have no water. Did God bring us here to die? The same people who saw the Red Sea split apart now questioned whether God could sustain them. This is the human condition repeated throughout history. Miracles inspire belief, but discomfort exposes doubt. And yet, God responded not with abandonment, but with provision. One morning, something extraordinary appeared on the ground. A thin white substance covering the desert floor, manna, bread from heaven. Every day God provided exactly what was needed. Not excess, not future supply, but daily provision. A lesson hidden in miracle. Trust me today. But even divine provision became familiar over time, and familiarity slowly turned into complaint. We are tired of this food. Imagine that. Heaven's provision rejected through ingratitude, yet God continued sustaining them, because even in rebellion, He was still forming them. At another moment, thirst overwhelmed the people. Desperation filled the camp, and God commanded Moses to strike a rock. Out of dry stone, water flowed, rivers in the desert, life in the impossible place. A powerful symbol. God brings life from what appears lifeless. But the deeper lesson was always the same. Dependence, not independence, not control, trust. Then Israel arrived at Mount Sinai, and everything changed again. Thunder shook the mountain, lightning split the sky, smoke rose like fire. The people stood at a distance in fear. Moses alone ascended, and there, God gave the 10 Commandments, not just rules, but identity. Commands about worship, truth, honor, faithfulness, justice. Israel was not just being freed from slavery, they were being shaped into something new, a covenant people. But while Moses remained on the mountain, the people below lost patience. Fear returned, impatience grew. The people gathered and demanded, "Make us gods to lead us." Gold was collected, an idol was formed, a golden calf, and the people worshipped it. This is one of the most painful spiritual patterns. When waiting becomes difficult, people create substitutes. Substitutes for trust, substitutes for identity. When Moses returned and saw what had happened, the covenant tablets shattered. Judgment followed. Many died in rebellion, and yet, even in judgment, God's mercy did not disappear. Because the story of Israel is not just about their failure, but about God's patience. The 12 tribes of Israel. As Israel moved forward, the nation was structured around the 12 tribes descended from Jacob. Reuben lost leadership. Reuben was the firstborn. He should have carried leadership, but instability cost him authority. Simeon, the scattered people. Simeon's tribe became fragmented. Instead of a unified territory, they were absorbed into Judah's land. Then Levi, the priestly tribe. Levi was set apart, no large territory. Instead, they were scattered among the tribes as priests, guardians of worship. Judah, the tribe of leadership. From Judah came David, and from David's line, future messianic promise. Judah represented leadership and authority. Dan, the struggling tribe. Dan was strong, but unstable. Over time, they migrated, seeking better land. Their history reflects struggle between calling and compromise. Naphtali, the tribe of freedom. Naphtali settled in fertile northern regions. Their land was beautiful and abundant. They became associated with swiftness and freedom. Gad, the warrior tribe. Gad settled east of the Jordan. They became known for strength and battle readiness. A tribe shaped by resilience. Asher, the tribe of provision. Asher inherited fertile coastal land, rich soil, abundant harvests. Their identity became tied to prosperity and provision. Issachar, the tribe of understanding. Issachar was known for wisdom, understanding seasons, discernment, strategic insight. Their strength was wisdom. Zebulun, the tribe of expansion. Zebulun lived near trade routes and coastlines. They connected Israel with surrounding nations. Movement and connection defined them. Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph received a double portion through his sons. Ephraim became influential and dominant. Joshua himself came from Ephraim. Manasseh inherited large territories on both sides of the Jordan. Joseph's legacy was fulfilled in abundance. Benjamin, the small but fierce tribe. Benjamin was small in size, but fierce in strength, known for warriors and resilience. The 12 spies. Before entering Canaan, Moses sent 12 spies. They explored the land for 40 days, and what they found was overwhelming. A land flowing with abundance, but also filled with fortified cities and giants. 10 spies returned in fear. We cannot take the land. Only 2 stood firm, Joshua and Caleb. Their message was simple. If God is with us, we can take it. Faith versus fear, and fear won. The 40 years of wandering. Because of unbelief, Israel was condemned to wander the wilderness for 40 years. A generation slowly passed away. The wilderness became both punishment and preparation. Rebellion continued. Korah challenged Moses' authority. The earth opened and swallowed his followers. Miriam, Moses' sister, died. Aaron, the high priest, died on Mount Hor. And eventually, even Moses would not enter the land. He saw it from a distance, the promised land, but his journey ended there. The death of Moses. Moses climbed Mount Nebo, and from there he saw everything God had promised: rivers, valleys, inheritance fulfilled. Then Moses died, a faithful servant who led a nation from slavery, but did not enter the final promise. A sobering truth. You can lead others into promise without fully stepping into it yourself. Joshua takes leadership. Joshua became the new leader, the faithful spy, the man of courage, and under his leadership, Israel finally crossed the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan parted, just like the Red Sea, and Israel stepped into Canaan. The land promised generations earlier to Abraham, the promise fulfilled. Not quickly, not easily, but completely. Israel's journey reveals a pattern. Deliverance is not the end of the story. Formation is. God does not only free people from slavery, He shapes them into something greater, through wilderness, through failure, through patience, through testing, and at the end, the promise stands. Not because Israel was perfect, but because God is faithful. If this journey through Scripture has spoken to you, pause for a moment and reflect. What part of Israel's story mirrors your own journey right now? Waiting, wilderness, struggle, or promise? Share it in the comments, and if this story has impacted you, take a moment to like and subscribe, because the greatest truth of this story is simple. Even when the path is long, God's promise never fails.